Remember when we used to talk about the paperless office,
e-commerce,
signing a contract on paper,
and even giving out an agent's pager number?
We're in a mobile world.
We're in a mobile world, and your business needs to be too.
It's a digital world.
Workflow is changing, and so too are our experiences.
There are over 350 PropTech players right now
competing for the space.
How do you keep up with it all? And what's next?
Welcome to Founders,
a new podcast with Josh Phegan
on the future of workflow in real estate.
For any real estate business, there comes that time where you've got to really make it easy for the consumer. What are the problems that you can actually solve in new and innovative ways? And it's a really important conversation to understand that one of the biggest liabilities that sits on any business's balance sheet is the whole conversation around vendor-paid advertising. The space has changed a lot over the course of the last decade. We've gone from a position of people paying in cash, now being in a position that wanted to do EFT, to even do credit cards, and now things like buy now, pay later type services. What most businesses didn't really realise is that they needed a payment gateway to have all of that handled. And what does that actually look like? It's been a very confusing space over a long period of time. The recent change in the federal government has also seen a change in some of the laws about what actually needs to happen and how those particular products are actually regulated. Today, we've got Chris Booth joining us from RealFlow. Chris, this is an amazing area to talk about. Talk to us a little bit about what are some of the challenges that real estate businesses actually face when it comes to things like vendor-paid marketing to actually make sure that they can help consumers to make the right decision to get their properties positioned correctly in the marketplace.
Yeah, well, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. Look, there's a number of, key moving parts when you're talking about VPA. You've got the operational component in terms of how money's managed internally. And then, of course, you've got how it's represented to the vendor as part of the listing process. So I guess from a process point of view in the back end, we've got still probably some culture of businesses still trying to hold on to some old adage of wanting to carry that cost or potentially even have that pay up front, which is completely fine too. And I think that the space itself sees some evolvement of the conversation piece being a little bit more simpler than, I guess, what people have probably gotten used to over the past couple of years, that having a pay later conversation has to be this ugly, difficult conversation. But it's more about just feeling comfortable about saying, hey, you're going to get a campaign from us as part of the process. Thanks for listing with me. You can choose to pay now or you can choose to pay later. Completely up to you.
I think the big conversation is that, how much has the world changed? I'm going to ask you a very simple question. When was the last time that you used an ATM on a weekly basis?
A long time ago.
It's right. Yeah. And it's like I went to one recently when I was overseas, and it was a bit of an interesting conversation. You start to think, wow, the world's changed. And when someone actually wants a physical credit card from me now, I'm like, oh, that's weird, because I'm used to things like Apple Pay where I would literally just tap and pay.
Absolutely.
And now to the point that literally I haven't carried a wallet for 3 years. And so I think that the whole notion, and I remember my parents being old school, and, if we were going to go and buy something, they'd 50, 100, 150, 200, that's how we'd actually take the money out, and we'd actually go physically down to the store and buy the set of Nikes or whatever it is. Yeah. And now consumers have actually moved in a position that we're very much a fast-moving consumer good. And I was having a look at my niece and nephew recently, and they were like, oh, guys, we're going to do that. I said, oh, no, we went to the store and daddy's phone didn't work, because it's they think there's a phone issue, not actually absolutely. A funding issue, right? So if you think about the space and how much that's actually changed, when it comes to being inside of a real estate office, we know that ultimately we have to sell vendor-paid marketing. And it's a really important thing because markets change too, right?
Correct.
So we went through a boom market. That was pretty phenomenal. Everyone was a legend, sold $200,000 above reserve, to all of a sudden hitting a point where we actually had long days on market in some marketplaces. And for the first time in a while, we're actually starting to see some expired listings. And that's actually been a bit of an issue because agents had never really seen that before, where we were getting beyond auction day or a normal for sale environment to day 60 and day 90 and going, oh, wow, we're now actually in trouble because we've got to reimagine what we do with this particular property, how we get it remarketed and how we get all of that, together. So vendor-paid marketing actually became more important again because people started to realize, hey, I've got to position the property differently and I've got to differentiate. And what's starting to happen in the digital environment is that we're changing the way that we're actually advertising property. So it's beyond just a photo now to now we actually have to have phenomenal video.
Absolutely.
And that video needs to be cut in different ways, like a preview reel, an actual launch video, a sold video as well, that can then go across the various social platforms, but then also to the digital advertising. And so although there was kind of a bit of a trend where vendor paid marketing amounts tended to reduce a bit because we started to pull out of things like newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
Now what we're actually seeing is that digital space is starting to see an increased need to spend more if an agent's actually going to get in front of the right audience.
Absolutely.
And you can't just dominate in newspapers like we used to, right? Now you need to dominate in the digital world.
Correct.
And what we know about the digital world is that it's a really hungry location for assets. So if you're an agent, what you've got to do is you've got to say, okay, well, this is a business model, right? So the business model is about making sure that every listing's got to lead to another listing. And the way that we do that is about maximizing audience to get as many buyers through that property. And if you have the foundational belief that getting lots of buyers to a property drives demand, that demand therefore drives a sale price, it's about positioning. And where a lot of agents have probably not really thought about it is that, you know, you walk into a restaurant and say, hey, Chris, lovely to see you. Can I take your jacket for you? And you say, yes, take my jacket. Man, that's $150 a head. If you sit down and they go, sparkling water or still, and you go, sparkling, they say, sir, would you like the San Pellegrino or the Antipodes? Mate, that's $200 a head. The fact there's a choice on sparkling water, like that's really changing it. You go to a nice little place and you say, can I get some water? They're like, yeah, mate, tap's over there. About $6 a head, right? So what you've got to start thinking is that agents have got to really understand that marketing is actually about positioning of brand and product. And positioning of brand and product and customer experience and service actually determine brand, and brand determines pricing power. So although it's a conversation around vendor paid marketing, what it is actually a conversation is about positioning your properties, the stylization of what it is that you do to make it easier, better and faster for the consumer to get to an end point. So then you can actually charge a higher fee and drive margin.
That's exactly right. Well, that's, one of the things I would say quite regularly is this inability to think outside of just the in front, as you talked about. But one thing that people are really need to be more aware of, I think, is about how what am I doing, and what is it saying about me, and where do I want to position myself in the market? How I want people to perceive how I do business, what I'm going to do for them. They don't they need to sort of start thinking about that as a process.
So jobs to be done for the consumer. So if you think about it, I don't know about you, but you walk into a house and you see a big scratched wall, you're like, oh man, that's 10 grand. And it's probably $1,000 with the local painter.
Correct.
But if the owner doesn't go down to doing that mini renovation, or doesn't go down to getting some basic styling done, or doesn't go down the route of actually getting a video done, and it's so funny. I just say to people, hey Chris, quick question. You spend 6 to 8 hours a day on your mobile phone, right?
Yep.
What are you watching? Well, you're watching videos, right?
Correct.
So if you don't have video, you don't have a digital strategy.
Exactly.
And so, have you ever bought a T-shirt online and then have it follow you everywhere you go?
Yeah,
we've got the same with property. So have a look at the property, it follows you everywhere you go. Yep. So the first conversation that I want to get people really clear about is that before you jump to a solution, actually understand what you're trying to do. Productization, getting the brand representation right. So you've got pricing power in market. And if you're dominating digital, you're going to go and do that. The secondary part is that then once we get there, don't be one of those people. You're either in abundance mode or you're in scarcity mode. If you're in scarcity mode, you're seriously worried about whether or not you're going to be able to sell the vendor paid marketing. And so it's actually your financial issues, your trepidation that's actually causing the issue.
Correct.
As opposed to it being the right thing for the vendor to actually maximize sale price. So once you understand that, and if you've got a level of confidence and you come from an abundant mindset, then you go, okay, I've got the chance to go and walk on $1 million asset, let's call it that. How am I going to position this $1 million asset to make sure that we cement the sale price? And if I get the marketing mechanism right, and I'm really passionate, I can sell that, then one of the really important components is to then make sure that I get the funding component right. So how are we actually going to go and fund it? Now, traditionally, a lot of agencies have had to learn the skill, and that was a real skill back in the 90s, early 2000s, about how to sell vendor paid and get the money up front. Like someone would write you out a check.
Yeah.
I think that later this year, maybe the RBA is going to, actually rule out that checks are even a legal denomination. So there's changes that are happening in that world. So in the digital space.
I remember those days. I started my career at the end of 2001.
Yeah.
And I remember actually having to, in Wollongong, and I remember actually having to, you still had the REA multi-list.
Yeah.
And paper advertising was kind of where you started to cut through how you're actually going to deliver.
Separate, differentiate.
Exactly right, yeah.
So the conversation for people, when it actually comes to the pointy end, and it's a very simple conversation. We say, okay, cool, so here are the size of the marketing campaigns, the large, the medium, the small. We probably rule out the $35,000 one. We probably rule out the small one. What do you prefer, either the large or the medium?
Yeah.
Probably go with the medium one, which is the most popular, which is what we do in training. Then, okay, great. They say, yeah, okay, cool. And then we're at that point where it's probably one line. It's like, look, so there's a couple of options. Some people would like to pay upfront through things like EFT on invoice. Some people would like to do it via a credit card. Some people would like a buy now, pay later type solution. Which one would you like? And so then the customer says, okay, great, there's a choice. And obviously, if you go down the buy now, pay later route, there's a fee associated with doing that. Yep. And we talk a little bit about that. There's an upfront and then a monthly. So there's no problems so that we can actually make all that happen.
Yeah, luxury choice is one thing I think the involvement of this particular sector has seen over the past few years. It's not just about talking about pay later. It's about trying to simplify the process because as agents, you've got enough going on on your plate and in your head. It's about saying, hey, look, at the end of that point, normally we know most vendors have made a decision at that point of, if I found the person to take this journey with me? And if the answer is yes, then the rest is just cementing the process to achieve the best outcome. And so that's when you say, look, you've got these options, you've got this luxury of choice. This is how much it's going to be. If you'd like to pay now, great. If you'd like to pay later, fantastic. That's there too.
So that's the conversation that happens in the lounge room. And this is then the bit where the workflow can potentially get clunky or where people can get a little bit uncertain about it. So if you go and have a look at it and talk me through what actually happens in your campaign flow product so that someone says, okay, great, I would like to do a buy now, pay later type service. What's the next step from an agent's point of view?
Really easy. The idea is just to, very simply, as agents should be, going out there listening and selling, bring that agency agreement back to your administrator, issue out a campaign via campaign flow. That goes straight out via email and SMS to the vendor for them to have that luxury of choice. Would I like to pay now via credit card, direct transfer, or would I like to pay later? If so, pay later, follow the prompts, upload what I need to, money's into the trust account within over a short period of time.
So the interesting conversation, there's a couple of little things in that application process, couple of minutes, basic things like an ID check.
Correct.
To make sure that we've got those things right.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty easy process for people, copy of a license, no doubt, those sorts of details. That gets verified. Once that's verified, then ultimately yes, you're approved. And from that point of view, then there's a period of time is elected, about whether or not it's more immediate or whether or not it's over a couple of days, whatever the time frame is. And that then comes into the trust account. And that can then be administered and used for some very specific purposes. Talk about what that funding is used for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, anything that's going to be from a creditor point of view managed by the office themselves. So it'd be the realestate.com domain, any newspaper, social media, anything that they want to build into their marketing campaign as part of their general process. And then outside of that, that's when you really start to get fun. So you can look at the styling. You can look at any minor works that need to be done as part of the preparation process for sale. So that's where you're really going to be able to leverage the relationship that the agency has with campaign flow to achieve the best possible outcome, because that's what every single person in that process is wanting to achieve, the best possible outcome. One of the things that when I'm coaching agents and I talk to them about, okay, well, what's one thing that you can say? Because some of them feel quite uncomfortable about going, well, because they feel like they're insulting the person if they're trying to bring up something, or when we all work.
And particularly on financial, it's like, you can't pay in cash. So but I think I love that whole conversation. Say, look, so there's a couple of options. What I'll do is I'll send you a quick link post. You make a decision on which one you'd like. And so then the customer's actually just making a choice at that point.
Absolutely.
And, we all go through completely different cash flow issues. As we record today, we're in the middle of apparently a cost of living crisis. So you start thinking about that. And for some people, that's very real. And for others, that they're not even seeing too much of a difference, and that's because they don't have a mortgage, so you start thinking about the different ages, and so it's about understanding your demographic. And I was reading over the weekend in the Australian Financial Review, they were saying that the hardest hit right now is people between 30 and 40 years old by the current set of interest rates, because they're the ones who tend to have the most amount of debt, at that stage of life cycle, coupling up, having kids, doing that sort of stuff. So what is interesting here is that the amount, probably up to around, say, 45,000 is what goes through platforms straight away.
Correct.
In special circumstances, you can apply for more if there's something significant.
Well, you've got different, of course, we're today talking about a very, micro markets, macro markets. So you've got completely variation of people listening that have got sale prices in completely different areas. So that's where we have certain scenarios where there may be a need to be able to invest higher to receive a higher return. But when we're having a conversation, with agents, we say to them, look, it can be very simple, because sometimes people very rarely someone doesn't know what needs to be done to prepare their property for sale. They just probably don't feel like they have the financial capacity to do so. So this is where it can be very easy as part of the process and the journey that they take with the vendor. As simple as question as, Mr. and Mrs. Prospective Vendor, if you had one thing that you'd love to do to your home to improve its value, if you had the money to do it, what would that be? And so you don't have to pull it. They'll know. They'll go, oh, well, to be honest with you, the place needs a paint. The retaining wall down has got a massive crack in it. We know that's going to be problematic in part of the process. They already know these things. And
I think it's also too about positioning too, right? Like from an advice point of view, are you open to some advice? Because the last thing I'd want is for a $1,000 painting issue to turn into a $50,000 negotiation item with the buyer.
Absolutely.
And I can help you with that, and there's solutions, and I can get a trade organised. I can make all that happen, even down to the point that if you needed some time for the funding, I can help you with that as well. And I just think it's about like ironing out the jobs to be done from a consumer point of view. Right. Now, from an agent's point of view, if you hadn't heard of RealFlow before, give us a bit of background, because I know that it is important from a compliance perspective, because this space has changed quite a lot with the new government that's come into play.
Absolutely.
How long has RealFlow been around for?
We're pushing 10 years at the moment, which in terms of the space itself is a seasoned professional, if you like to call us that. So started in 2013 with our founding product to be Commission Flow. And then what we established over the past few years was, that client base looking for more resources, more service from the great service that are being provided in that area to then be evolving into the VPA space. And that's where Campaign Flow itself came to play.
Founders is brought to you by Josh Phegan Digital. You know, when we were setting out to go and create Josh Phegan Digital, we just had this whole idea that we wanted training to be on demand. You know, and everything in our life is on demand. We just press play inside of the Netflix app. We press play on YouTube, play on Spotify. Why couldn't we just press play on training? And what we decided is we want to be like super relevant to real estate agents, so that in under a couple of minutes each day, if you wanted to, you could upskill and you could grow in new ways. And so we decided that we were going to release this thing that we called The Edit, which is basically the latest in property news stories that's happening every week right the way around the country. So you could be incredibly sharp in your conversations with sellers. And then we built out the short courses, which was all about rapidly building skills, you know, whether or not it's about learning how to get better fees or to put on an assistant. And then we actually wanted to give you access to blueprints, so you didn't have to wait for it every year. You could just watch it whenever you wanted and actually go from zero to hero around everything that it takes, from goal setting, self and energy management, what you're doing around prospecting, listing, negotiation, and actually just have a system for the way that you work. Together with, you know, getting really inspired by some of the best people in the industry with the black and white interviews. Josh Phegan Digital is available on iOS and also on Android. It's an incredible app, and it gives you everything that you'll need to be a much better agent. It's time to switch on. And then that's even moved into other things like style flow as well.
Correct.
So if you needed to get some buy now, pay later type stuff around the styling of a property, that actually became available. And I guess I'm going to almost create a product for you called Renovation Flow, where if there was a mini renovation or something that needed to happen, it's exactly the same thing that all sits inside of that Commission Flow product. Non-bank lender. You need to make sure that you've got some financial services components around all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And your ACL as well.
What is ACL?
Australian credit license.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you've got an Australian credit license that's in play. You've got all the compliance side of stuff. When it actually comes back down to drawdown schedules, what's actually happening inside of the financial accounting around the trust account, all of those things. Talk to us about how that workflow is being streamlined inside of modern estate agency practices now with these types of products.
Absolutely. Well, administrators, of course, are fantastic with the process. That's what they're there to do, and they will engage in anything that's going to make their life easier. Because I think with the evolvement of the sectors come in their head another job. It's another thing I've got to do. So integration plays a significant part of where things are moving forward to. So people can still offer that great support and service that the agents, the vendors, the market wants. However, now the administrators feel a little bit more supported with the fact that they can just go to one place to manage that property and to manage the financial component of that property as well, in terms of money coming in, money going out.
And also too, I think there's a big risk issue. We've seen a number of the hacks and things that have actually happened on a more global scale. And it's also too, like, I remember in the old school days, I would like literally fill out the vendor paid marketing form whilst I was there with the client, take the credit card details, write them down, go back to the office, put it on the front receptionist desk, leave it there over the weekend for them to turn up on Monday and to then come and process that through whatever the payment gateway of the day was. And now I'm like, oh my goodness, like literally the amount of risk that I'd exposed that client to because we didn't actually have the right processes in play to realize, hey, that's sensitive information and that should not just be in a public space, right?
People are still doing it. People in this industry at this time of their life are still issuing out trust account details via email. I have unfortunately heard of so many scenarios, whether it be on the vendor side, just every scenario that you can think of where it just hasn't played out the way that we'd want it to.
And we've seen a lot of that. I can't even say the word. It's like PHILISNG, like for siphoning, where they literally send an email. And we've actually had that scenario where someone's cracked into like a Google or an Office 365 account and then literally sent an email directly out. They've been watching what you've been doing. Yeah. You've sent the email to the client, said, hey, by the way, if you can pay the funds into this particular account.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, the next key thing that then happens is that then they send another email a minute later and says,
phishing.
Sorry, I actually got that wrong. Yep. Here's the actual proper account details. And then before you know it, the money goes south. And so from a compliance point of view, think about it this way, that you don't want like 5 different ways to be able to do one thing. And so you've got to start to think about streamlining of that process, whether or not it's direct deposit through your EFT scenario, your credit card payment and the processing of that, or moving into a buy now, pay later service. That should all literally sit through one funding system where you literally press a button and that just happens. Yeah. And that happens in a digital environment. So you've actually got an external third party that's got all the security and all the recognitions around it and the requirements under the ACL to actually make sure that those details are stored correctly and processed correctly and done correctly so that then literally you're hitting a compliance level. That is then an important part that when it comes down to the funds that are held in trust, if you're in a position that someone doesn't spend all of the funds that are held, let's say, for example, I had $10,000 and we only spent $6,000 in the campaign, what happens to that for? Does that ultimately go back to the lender or does that go directly to the owner at that point of settlement, for those funds?
Well, I'd say that it would go back to the provider. So then that payment can be managed from what's been spent.
Yep.
So it's nice and clear rather than trying to throw money in different directions.
Yep.
But when you talked about that I guess that one solution area, that's I guess where Campaign Flow comes into its strength for you to be able to provide a service of security funds, a security process to be able to just provide one solution. So then they can make their call from there. You as a business owner, you're providing a safe payment gateway to do so and providing the best option. Because there are a significant amount of businesses that still don't have merchant facilities, credit card facilities. So having a solution like Campaign Flow solves immediately that problem. So it's not just about a conversation around pay later, because that's kind of where people go in that part. It's like, yeah, okay, that's an option, sure, but it's been around for a while now. But let's talk about how you're actually transacting. How are you engaging that process and what are you providing as a solution? It's like, great, let's just provide this one solution. And that will allow us to be able to provide all those areas safely, and we can just move on with what we do well.
The next conversation then is obviously understanding costs. So putting a solution like this in play, what does that look like? Is it on a per agent basis, a per office basis, is it a per campaign basis? Like, how does it actually work?
Well, the great thing about a Campaign Flow is that it's free for agencies to use, not for businesses to use. Of course, our Style Flow product for businesses that actually support the real estate industry as part of that process of preparing for sale. But when it comes to the vendor cost, of course, there's an upfront fee and then an ongoing monthly component as well.
So if you go on the direct deposit, cost mechanism around that from a vendor's perspective? Zero. And if we're in a position that they then do a credit card, there'll be a credit card merchant fee?
Merchant fee, yep.
Yep, and I assume that there's a difference between Visa, MasterCard and Amex probably.
Correct.
That usually is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's whatever the commercial rate of the day is.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then in addition to that, when it actually comes to if they choose the buy now, pay later, that's where there's an establishment fee, so to speak, and then ultimately a monthly. So, and that monthly fee, ultimately, if they sell in under a month, it's only that 1 month. If it goes into the second month, then ultimately it's out to that 60-day part.
Yeah. So it's allowing to support the process itself rather than to stick one fee, irrespective of where someone falls in that process. And I think that from that perspective, it makes things, especially in the dynamic market you're in, makes things a lot more pleasing, I guess, financially from that side.
And obviously, we've seen a significant change to interest rates over the course of the last year or so. And obviously, that would change the interest rate of the day on that buy now, pay later product as well, right? So that would continue to float over time. So I think it's a really important conversation to understand that, like, those things do move. It's not a set and forget forever. And so you need to be understanding that literally the markets will actually move up and down. And as they go down, so too will the costs associated with doing that. But now you've actually got a solution in play. Integrations are an important part. People look at that about, what does it integrate with? But the most important thing, as I say, before you look at integration, what do you actually need it to do? And so that's a really important mechanism. Talk to us a little bit about that, about what you've done now and what's on the roadmap for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's use Vault as one of our first integrations. All they're really wanting to do is manage the financial component within Vault itself. So it's really just as simple as sending out that campaign. So yet again, making it easy. So when they're going to that campaign, going to that property itself, and they're managing the campaign through Vault, they're just able to issue out the campaign via campaign flow when it connects through. So they're just pressing the one button to send across both, and that's where things become nice and easy. And then our ability, I think this is probably where I've found the industry or the sector as well, is that when we get to the the sold part as well, what happens at that point? Because that's been something that's been very challenging across not only our sector, but then you look at the conveyancing sector as well. So it's like, well, how are we communicating, connecting with every part of the journey and everyone involved in that process, and then being able to pick up at the point of unconditional exchanged, and being able to then communicate with the solicitor to then a conveyancer to be able to actually collect those funds in a, in the best possible way, that doesn't sort of, break the process up or make it more challenging to actually finalise.
I think that's the important conversation, is to make sure that you've got everything there clear, you're holding funds in trust, they're dispersed correctly. At the end of that process, those funds are returned if there's anything that's left over, as it would normally be the case, but you've actually in a position that you're really clear and transparent around process.
And I guess you talked about future, with Agent Box, Rex, and continuing to evolve the integrations component. It's a very important part of where we see our strategy to provide more value to the whole industry.
So interesting enough, you're also in New Zealand. Tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So we've got a fantastic team over there, of course, which is a brand over there is List Now. List Now has actually had a long-standing relationship with probably about 7 years, I'd say, within the sector, which is great. And that itself, it's been interesting to talk to the team about how that's evolved as well, because I think they were doing what you were mentioning before, Josh, about the paperwork, having to do the paper and write it all out and then issue it and go through this huge process. So, the relationship itself with List Now has developed in terms of utilising the back end of our support process with Campaign Flow to then be able to give the New Zealand market, the agents and the vendors, a really nice, smooth process that the Australian markets had the advantage of over the past 3 years.
One other thing just to be aware of too is that initially RealFlow began, and you still continue in this section of the market today, with commission flow, correct, which is, in circumstances where people needed to get advance access to a commission,
absolutely,
that's actually available in market. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, look, I think we were saying this before as well. Commission itself, and when you come into advancing commission, is a bit of a faux pas. People don't like talking about it, even though it is very, very relevant, and on a daily basis flowing through, to use the pun. So obviously at the point of that sale process, so the conditional, unconditional, or the exchanged, then an agent may very well decide that they'd like to access that commission early to be able to utilise for other things. The thing that I guess from our side, what we see is that agents leveraging the relationship or leveraging the product itself to be able to invest back in their business, invest in themselves. And that's where I see that sector continuing to grow and mould.
I just think about it as a big cash flow timing thing. At the end of the day, literally, there are some really awkward points in residential real estate's cash flow. One of my favourite awkward points is always February, because ultimately we did nothing December and January, and all of a sudden we're a bit in trouble. And so
you've been on holidays over that period of time, and you need
and it can be useful. But I think it's really important to understand that literally you've got a much more holistic point of view. That you've got things like commission flow, you've got campaign flow, which is the really important part for the vendor paid marketing side of things. You're also talking to me that you've got some upcoming products that you're looking at the moment, including things like equity flow, which are going to be pretty interesting to watch, to be able to make that whole deposit phase so much easier and better, for consumers as a part of what it is that you do. If someone needed to get into contact with you guys to find out about how it works, get a bit of a demo, have a bit of an understanding, talk about integrations, all the questions that they might have, where would they go?
Realflowfinance.com.au, nice and easy.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the Founders Podcast today. Awesome to have your discussion. I know there's lots of great values and takeaways for people to understand about, hey, it's not just the payment gateway, it's about establishing a brand and an experience and making sure that you can iron out any of the challenges from the consumer's point of view to make it simple and easy to be able to make sure they have their property positioned, to be able to maximize their sale price, great renovations, great styling, and to make the finance side of this business less clunky, less challenging, and actually nice and simple so everything just flows.